Hello, everyone, and welcome to what I like to call the What Are You Reading podcast, where I sit down with different individuals and try to learn off of them, and hopefully you will learn off of them as well. My first guest is going to be my college professor and someone who focuses towards education, and that is Dr. Patrick Spearman. So, we are going to discuss different topics of education, the banning of books in the current age, and affirmative action, and including many more. Um, One side note, sadly, the computer that I recorded myself and also the better version of the audio, the computer broke on me, so you're not going to really be able to hear me as well. You should be able to hear me, but not as well as I wished, and also you're not going to be able to see me in this interview. But that doesn't really matter. I'm not the star of the show here. The guest is, which is Dr. Spearman. So hopefully you sit down, relax, maybe grab a snack, grab some popcorn, get your drink ready. Don't worry, you can pause the video if you have to. But hopefully you'll learn something. And what are you reading, by the way? Let's get into it. How was your day today?
Pretty good. No complaints, outside of the larger political situation, no complaints, man.
Yeah. If those watching this is the day after Election Day, so lots has gone on since recording this and uploading it.
Okay.
So my first question is, what are you reading?
What am I reading? Oh, excellent question. So I'm reading a couple things. One book I just found, was published this month, is Malcolm Before X, which looks at Malcolm X's life prior to him joining the Nation of Islam and ultimately receiving his letter X, which signifies the eradication of his last name. So I'm reading that. I just got finished reading, actually, the autobiography, or I guess we call it biography of Marvin Gaye called Divided Soul. And you know what, really, to be honest, that's pretty much it. I got some other things that I have on my shelf that I haven't pulled down yet, but I keep looking at them and they keep calling me. So, of course, I'm doing reading for classes, but that's my own personal reading that I'm doing right now. Okay. Yeah.
Real quick, I'd like to ask you if you can move up a little bit more.
Sure. Oh, no sound. Okay. How about that?
Say something again.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Okay.
We good? Okay.
I think so.
All right.
So back to the questions. For the people that are watching, what is your background?
Oh, get out of here. So I have a PhD in urban education from Temple University, a master's degree in educational foundations from the University of Cincinnati, and a bachelor's degree in African American studies from the University of Cincinnati. I don't know if I said that, but the master's from the University of Cincinnati as well. And so my background is African American studies, educational foundations, and urban education is kind of like when I was in grad school, like the updated version of Foundations of Education, which kind of looks at the intersections of history, sociology, philosophy, and its impact in education, and really looking at that relationship between the large society and schooling and the profession of teaching. So that's kind of my background, and so I'm looking at African American history, African American literature, foundations of education, including history of ed, sociology of education. So in my courses, I try to incorporate all of those different perspectives to give students a better understanding of what it's like to be, what it could potentially be like as an educator in American society.
Okay. And then my next question is, what piqued your interest into the fields that you've gotten into?
You know what? Be honest with you. When I started in undergrad, way back when, much like many students, I started off just wanting to major in something to make a lot of money. So I chose engineering initially, and that didn't work out. Really wasn't a fan. Switched to business, And, once I started taking the business courses, I also took courses in African American studies just because I wanted to learn more about the African American experience. Never really thinking about that being a major, and, had an interaction with an advisor who kind of shifted my focus and decided to major in that with the hopes of going to graduate school and then majoring and getting an MBA, and doing the business that way. But what happened was I was so enthralled and engaged and really liked the relationship that I established with my professors and the relationship they created in the environment, the culture they created in the classroom, that kind of made me want to do that instead of do the business thing. And so I just enjoyed being in that classroom and being in that experience with those faculty members. And they, had high expectations of the students. They pulled a lot out of their students, and you left those classes learning more than what you initially anticipated that you would learn. And I wanted to have that same role in the lives of my students. So I wanted to have that impact on them so they would, not just do something about making money or trying to make a lot of money, but actually do something about improving either themselves or trying to improve the world around them.
What futures hold for education?
The future of education, that's a good one. I think that right now, we're in a kind of a teaching shortage, meaning that we have a lot of classrooms that need well-trained teachers, and we lack those teachers right about now. People could argue that it was a product of the pandemic, but I think it was something that was kind of leading up to that prior to the pandemic, and so the pandemic kind of exacerbated that. So I think the future of education is trying to figure out a way to, in many ways, increase the number of candidates that we have coming through teacher education programs so we can ultimately provide more classroom teachers to the schools and school districts. In addition to that, and we're starting to see some of that right now, there's probably going to be different pathways for individuals to ultimately become licensed teachers, in addition to the traditional pathway of getting a degree and a licensure through a four-year college or university. So yeah, so we're going to have to do that because we need more teachers in the classrooms, and for whatever reason, we don't have individuals wanting to take this traditional route.
So, someone I like to listen to a lot is Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Okay.
And he said it a few times on different shows, but he says, or he asks, who are 5 teachers that you could say influenced you the most?
That's an excellent question.
And he often says after you count those 5, and if you're trying to become a teacher yourself, would you be able to be on the hand of some other student?
Ooh, that's a good one.
So, but the question for you is, who would those 5 be for you?
Man, get out of here. So those 5 would be, wow.
If you could get to 5, but
I
imagine you could.
Oh, definitely. I'm probably gonna leave some people out, but if these are the 5 that come to the top of my head, of course. Dr. Vibert White, he was an African American history professor, again at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Nate Norman Jr., he was my dissertation advisor when I did my PhD at Temple University. Have Dr. Eric Abercrombie, he was my teacher in African American Studies also at the University of Cincinnati. Dr. Angeline Jamison Hall, she was the African American literature professor I had. She's the one that taught me basically how to write. I'll give her all the credit as it relates to that. And who would be the last one? I would say Dr. Vanessa Allen Brown. She was a part of my master's program also at the University of Cincinnati. And she was just a phenomenal teacher, but also just, and she's still living, of course, but she's a phenomenal human being, very caring, but she knew her stuff. And, wanted to, all of those, and you didn't ask me this question, but I'll just say that. And, I've taken pieces of those individual teachers, those professors, and they are a part of who I am as an educator. It didn't happen deliberately. It just happens because you're in their presence for so long and you soak up, what they do. And, we say that oftentimes as educators, when we go through this process, that we initially mimic a lot of the educators that we have until we create our own style. And I'll just be honest with you and say that my style is kind of a conglomerate of all of those individuals because they had such a profound impact on me. And, I also want to have that profound impact on my students.
Right. it kind of correlates with most job fields. And for example, I remember seeing a question about writing was, is it okay if your writing kind of somewhat similar to authors you like to read? And in a way, I would say, in a way, those authors are your teachers. So when you are emulating them in your writing, you could say, as long as you're not deliberately copying every single thing they write, but in a way, it's kind of a sign of respect, sign of they did their jobs.
I agree. And definitely, I agree with your notion in terms of writing and how we're reading and the impact that it has on writing. Definitely.
And then my next question was, so you do deal with a lot of students that go for this program.
Yes.
What signs do you look for a good educator within the students? Or
good question. The signs I look for, really, I won't say it's simple, but usually, and it depends on where they are in the program. So, I teach students when they first come into the program, so first year, and then I catch them again, usually during the third year. And, of course, if I had them both times, I look for that growth in terms of since they've been here. And it doesn't have to be growth in terms of the profession, but just growth in terms of maturity. That's number one. And so because I don't really see them out in the field interacting with students, I can't really speak to that. But I'll just tell you that in terms of what I look for, and this is the same in both, I look for the passion that they have either for helping young people or passion that they have for the subject matter itself. The things that they do here in our program, excellent things. I can't say anything negative about them. But the one thing that I think you can't teach individuals to actually care either about the subject matter or care about young people. If you don't have that, if that's not in you, then it'll be real difficult for you to be, for me, for my definition, an effective teacher. And we kind of talked about a little bit of that today in terms of, what does it take to be an effective educator and how that is a little bit different than other professions and other majors out there.
And by the way, the watchers, I am in Dr. Spearman's class. I was in 2 of his classes so far. And then going on to the point when you said what we talked about in class. But my next question is kind of a touchy question. But
Okay.
So with the current politics today, what are your views on the current banning of books in school libraries?
I'm totally against banning any books in terms of school libraries. I think that it's from my vantage point, it's not the role of the government or any educational agency to determine what individuals should read or should not read. I think that is on that's the role of the teacher, number one, in the classroom. But I think what supersedes that is the role of the parent or guardian, whoever is that manages and takes care of that child, should ultimately make that decision. Now we're in an age where, and it happened before as a student of history, this, that, we're in an age now where we think we know what's best for everyone, and we try to make decisions for the entire populace. And oftentimes we always get it wrong. And history is going to look back on this movement, and it's going to be one of those moments where we couldn't, how do we let it get this far? But like I said, as a student of history, it's very cyclical. Or maybe not even cyclical, but it ebbs and flows in terms of almost like a pendulum. We swing one way to the right or swing back to the left. And we're at a point now where we're very much trying to negate and get rid of any things that we don't agree with as a country and as a nation. And that's not the way to raise individuals, to create individuals that will be fully functioning members of society, not only American society, but global society.
And going off the history of it, we both know the history of the Snooks monkey tribe.
Definitely.
I don't know if you want to explain it to the listener, or I should.
Well, you probably should, because I'll get into that thing. And of course you can do it either now or do it later. But just the idea that individuals decided that this should not be taught in school, this one particular view should not be taught. We should only teach one particular view. And in this case, we're talking about the idea of creationism versus the Big Bang Theory. And the idea that why not teach it and allow students to make, you're not necessarily imposing religion or imposing a particular view, but students need to know what's out there, what has been talked about in the world, agree with it or disagree with it. When you begin to limit what students can learn, students grow up oftentimes being very resentful. And I think we may have probably talked about some of this stuff in class when I had you. I think, well, for this class too, but probably the very first class, the intro class, where we did the history quiz and we talked about, okay, so no, why don't you know this? And then students talked about, well, yeah, I saw it, but some of it wasn't taught. And you begin to ask the question, well, why wasn't it taught? And so that becomes very problematic, and students are oftentimes very upset that the fact that their education kind of severely limited what they should learn. And I think we're dangerously running close to that right now.
Right, and just being a history nerd myself, I could definitely see like points where history is left out in the history class that definitely should be put in there.
Yeah.
For example, I I don't think I was ever really taught about the Japanese internment camps in World War II. And I kind of had to teach myself about it. So the next point is a point you bring up in your class, usually at the beginning. I think it was both this class and your opening class.
Yeah.
And that is, what is your ideal society?
Man, look at that. I think the ideal society is where you prepare individuals to be ready for what's going on now in society, but also for the future. I wish I could say that there will be a situation where everyone would be employed, and I guess if it's my ideal society, we could, and everyone has a role and responsibility in helping to maintain that society. And the educational system that's a part of that society prepares individuals to, participate fully in that society, and not to a situation where once you do something, that's the only thing you're going to do for the rest of your life. They have an education, they have a training that allows them to move based on their interests. If they want to do something for 10 years, 15 years, and want to then switch and do something else, they have the training, they have the education to make that, and society allows that to happen. Of course, it would be a society where education would be free. Much of our societies in other parts of the world allow students to attend education as far as they want, as long as they show the interest and they maintain a certain standing. And I think that we should also have that, or that's what I would have in my society. But definitely egalitarian, definitely something where individuals are prepared for not only what's going on right now, but prepared for what happens in the future, and have the training and education necessary to shift and change as society changes and as their interests change in many ways. That's probably a short question to a long-winded answer that I could give you, but I'll just keep it short.
I understand.
Yeah.
My next question is, what would your advice be to someone that's wanting to get into education?
Oh, wow. I number one, I would say definitely get in it, and I would say turn down all the negative voices that you hear that are telling you that either you're too smart or you shouldn't do that, or the young people are bad, or whatever things they try to tell you that will dissuade you from doing that thing. I think that if you have that passion in you, that just something that you want to do, I would recommend doing it. Like we talked about a little bit earlier, there are many interest points now in terms of how you can come into the school system. You can go through a traditional route. We have alternative certification routes. You have post-bac certification routes, meaning that you get your bachelor's degree and then you come back and you get licensure so you can teach in that area where you have your degree. There are a variety of different options available for you to teach if that's what you want to do. So I would say, number one, get into it. And then once you get into it, and we say this in class all the time, and you are actually teaching, get to know your students. Get to know your students and meet your students where they are. You know the content, you know the material, but you don't know those students, and you need to get to know them so you can figure out the best way to teach them the material that you want them to learn.
Okay, and then maybe to go off on that.
Okay.
I definitely could say I'm someone that's kind of waving in a bit in education. Yeah. I think I should be honest about that.
Definitely.
And I definitely understand and I agree with pretty much all of it about trying to relate to your students. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So The next point I was going to bring up is, what is your philosophy on education?
So my philosophy of education is good. So I'll send you back to maybe a textbook or some notes somewhere. We talked about, probably in both classes, this whole idea of social reconstructionism, which basically means that you teach and train your students to ultimately, like I kind of explained in my ideal society, that they should be the ones, you teach and train them so that they're able to go in and change and transform society so that it's more egalitarian, so that it's more beneficial for everyone. It's not just, beneficial for a small group of individuals. This comes out of 1930s, George S. Counts, there the school built a new social order, where he was responding to that time period, early 1930s, with the Great Depression. And, dealing with the Great Depression during that time period, coming out of the roaring 20s into the 1930s, they're looking at society and saying, where do we go wrong? How can we improve this thing? And their thinking was, as educators and training of educators, they said, we need to train teachers to train students so they can transform society so this never happens again. And so I come at that from that perspective, that ultimately education needs to have a purpose. And from my vantage point, the purpose needs to be to create a society that's equal and just for everyone, that it's not just for the ones that have the most power, the most influence, but it's something that everyone can benefit from. But it only happens if everyone's engaged and involved, and you train people to do that. So that's ideally that's my philosophy. And so in terms of how I teach that, of course, it can't happen overnight, but initially about that is, that you teach students ultimately to question and critique. When they see things that are not right in the classroom, when they see things that are not right in society, instead of just throwing up their hands and saying, well, that's not my purview, I don't have anything to do with that. No, you need to question, you need to critique, and then you need to maybe create solutions or ways in which to attack and deal with that particular problem, that issue. And particularly when you're dealing with students and you have them in your classroom in the schools, and you see something with students that you say just isn't right, we just can't throw up our hands or blame out-of-school factors or blame the parents or blame the neighborhood. We need to investigate and see what's going on. Certain things are, based on out-of-school factors, but there are a lot of things that we do in the classrooms and the schools that also exacerbate some of those problems. And if we can eliminate those things that we can control, we can create a better environment for our students in those classrooms, in those schools.
Okay. So this is kind of a three-part question.
Okay.
It was originally a one, but I figured maybe we could expand on it a bit.
Okay.
Right now we're reading in class, or we just finished up, was a book called Hunger of Energy, Hunger of Education by Richard Rodriguez. And I was wondering first if you mind giving a little overview for the viewer what the book is.
So, man, that book is Richard Rodriguez. He was a Mexican-American young person raised in the 1950s. And he writes, it's kind of autobiographical work, but there's a lot of other things that are going on in there. And basically he walks us through, and basically the overall thesis of the work is that his education basically, number one, kind of changed him as an individual, and a part of that change was separating him from his family. And he walks us through how, number one, how he was prior to his educational experience, that initial experience in education, and then how, as he became more and more engaged and involved in the education that he experienced, he went to Catholic schools, how that changed and transformed him, and he argues separated him from his family and his culture. And so hence the title, Hunger of Memory. He's trying to, in many ways, reclaim that memory, that culture, that experience that he had prior to him being a part of the educational environment. And he looks at it from a variety of different facets or perspectives. And ultimately, he walks us through him trying to reclaim. Number one, pointing out where these things have separated him from where he feels the distance, and the things that he's done to try to reclaim that feeling, that comfort, that intimacy that he described at the very beginning of the book.
And then the second point was, one of the terms he brings up in the book is scholarship boy. And I was wondering if you could explain that a bit.
Wow, man, look, you can have people run out to get this book. So scholarship boy is the individual, poor working class individuals who are in school who, through their experiences of being educated, kind of similar to his experience, find themselves being separated from their family. As they become more and more educators. They become more and more achievement driven, that ultimately they find themselves further and further from their family and from their culture and from their experiences. The scholarship boy is not necessarily an individual who's on a scholarship, but it's the individual who pretty much flips his family for his school and his school for his family. And so the schooling in many ways becomes the family, and that's where he gets everything that drives him, and his family becomes second or third in terms of what really influences him and makes him want to achieve.
And then the third point is, as an educator, if you see a student that you would probably consider as a scholarship boy, how do you approach that, and how do you handle it in any certain way?
That's interesting, and to be perfectly honest with you, I don't know how you would necessarily handle that, because by all intents and purposes, within the context of the classroom, this is the ideal student. This is the student that you want all your students to be. The scholarship boy is the one who academically is at the top of their class. They're the ones that turn in their homework. They're the ones that come to class, that do the reading. Everything that you want your students to do, that's what the scholarship boy or girl does in the classroom. Again, going back to what I said before, but if you really get to know your students, and get to know the families, you may be having some insight in terms of what those things are, if they're actually suffering for what we describe as a scholarship boy. I guess the main thing is that you have to kind of let them know and hopefully instill in them the idea that it's okay to still be, you can achieve in this environment and this schooling environment, but also be a part of your family. That your family, is not less than, not inferior to your teachers or your administrators that you see on a regular basis. We saw a lot of that in terms of Rodriguez, this idea that he looked up to his teachers and looked down on his parents. And we don't ever want that to happen as it relates to young people. I don't care how well you do in the classroom. I never want a young person to look down on their parents or diminish their parents' accomplishments in favor of the accomplishments of teachers. But all of that it depends on the individual student. But ultimately, I would say, just as an answer to that, you want to show them that you can do both. You can be proud of your parents and still do well in academic settings and not have to transfer one for the other.
So this question, I don't know if you want to leave the college point out of it, but what is your opinion on the current school system?
I think that the current school system is how it's always been. I think that ultimately it's a partnership between parents and teachers and administrators to ultimately do what's best for that child. I think a lot of individuals now, for whatever reason, don't really understand that it's a partnership. And so, whereas, you expect the teachers to expect the parents to do everything, that the parents expect the teachers to do everything, and it's not going to work that way. Because I only have, if I'm a teacher in the classroom, I only have the student, a certain amount of hours in a day. You have those students the rest of the time. I think that if we work together as a unit, ultimately we can do what's best for that young person. And I think we've kind of lost sight of that. We're kind of at the point now where a lot of individuals try to blame either the parents are blaming the teachers are blaming the parents, and the children, the students are the ones that are suffering. But in kind of to sum this up, what it really takes is for us, and as a parent, but also a teacher educator, we have to be advocates for our young people. We have to be advocates for our children. As teachers, we need to be advocates for our students. And that's the way that we can ultimately make the system better. The system is what it is. The system is made up of individuals. But I think if everyone works together to do what's best for young people, I think that we can have a system that we can all be proud of.
So, what are the challenges facing teachers today?
I think the challenges that are facing teachers in many ways is a lack of respect on the part of the larger society. Everyone thinks that because they've been in the school or they've graduated from school, they've been in classrooms and they can do what teachers do. And we saw during the pandemic that clearly parents realized that they couldn't do what teachers could do. And they couldn't wait to send their children back to school because the teachers were the ones that were trained to provide them with that education. And I thought that having gone through that time period, that teachers would in many ways earn more credit and respect in society because of that, but it seems like we reverted back to the mindset that we had prior to the pandemic. that individuals do not think teachers have a specialized skill. They don't even think it's a part of, it's a real authentic profession. And so because of that, there's a lack of respect. And, sadly, that's the part that really it makes it difficult for teachers to do what they need to do in the classrooms. And it's really about helping children, but also helping the future. And until we get a better handle as a larger society of giving respect to teachers and schooling in general, we'll continue to struggle with regard to that.
So my next point, so what would you say, well, let me bring up this point I think about sometimes. In a way, the student is kind of like the customer in the business of education, and you've been on both sides of it. You've been the customer and you've been the employee giving out the product.
Yeah.
So in a way, from when you were the customer, how do you feel that things have, in my question, what are 5 improvements that you've seen since you were a student?
Okay. You know what? I'm gonna kind of alter the question a little bit. I don't like, and I know where the analogy comes from in terms of, we see our students as customers. I get that. And I guess in this environment, I guess you could make that argument in terms of, young people, because they're paying for their education, being customers. And I guess you could also make the argument that we provide a service. But I think that it's a little bit different because, ultimately as a customer, if you don't like what you get, you can always return it and get a refund. And you can't do that in terms of education. This thing, once you're done with 4th grade, you're done with 4th grade. You can't go back. I mean, I guess you can go back and redo it, but you don't get a refund. So I think that, in terms of answering your question, one of the major changes I've seen is, of course, technology. That's number one. The technology that, some would say is used, and it makes things a lot easier, but in many ways it's oftentimes misused by students as well as sometimes by teachers. So that's one of the major changes. Also, I think the change in terms of just what we talked about a minute ago in terms of this mindset that, students and young people are customers. I don't know. I think that kind of sets up a bad relationship between teacher and student because, this attitude, well, I'm paying for this and, I should be able to, the customer's not always right, if we're going to use that analogy. In fact, the reason why you come to the school in many ways is to have, what the things that you don't know, we're going to help you to learn those things. The things that you know that aren't so, we're going to help you to figure those things out. So sometimes, no, the customer isn't always right. But, if you use that analogy, sometimes, students come here with the mindset that they're always right. And we should, in many ways, kind of reformulate what we do to fit the needs of students. I think that's one of the other major changes is that, again, going back to what we said just a minute ago, connected to that, I think that connects this whole idea of teachers not having the respect that they normally have. I can remember times when, even though as a student you don't agree with it, if the teacher said that, hey, you need to do A, B, and C, then you did A, B, and C. If the teacher said you weren't doing something, the parents were more likely to take the word of the teacher than not. I think we have a mindset now because of the lack of appreciation and respect for teachers that, there's almost this animosity, this antagonism between parents and teachers. And I'm not trying to generalize or anything like that, but I think that if we can come to that thing with a sense of mutual respect on both sides, I respect the parent because I'm not a parent, I'm not the parent of this child. You respect me as the educator because you're not an educator. I think we can get more done, those things. I also think that in terms of the increase in students being able to take college classes in traditional school, that's a major change that wasn't there. Of course, when I was in school, we had AP, we had even International Baccalaureate or IB where you could potentially get college credit. But this new thing where you can actually take college classes in high school, I think that's definitely a change. And for overall, I think we're very positive change in most ways as long as it's not abused. I think that's 4. I can't think of the 5th one, to be honest with you. But clearly there are a whole host of changes that we've seen. And I'm not going to say they're all negative. I think some of them are very positive. But everything has to be done in a way that to answer the question, what's best for the student.
Well, real quick, realizing my fourth card is missing, so I did luckily put it on my
Okay,
phone.
okay.
So when you see me pulling out my phone, I'm not trying to be
Oh,
disrespectful.
we're cool, we're cool.
But the next question is kind of a three-parter again,
Okay.
or a two-parter, depending how you answer it. But we did kind of discuss this, I think, a week or so ago in class.
Mm-hmm.
One is who's Menard Jackson,
Oh, okay, okay.
and then can you explain the Philadelphia plan?
Okay, so Maynard Jackson was the
Oh.
first African. That's okay. The first African American mayor of a major American city in the South. He was the mayor of Atlanta, Georgia. I want to say 1973. And so we showed that or talked about that in class because we were looking at this whole idea of affirmative action, and so that kind of connects to the idea of the Philadelphia plan. Basically, this idea that because of past wrongs, historical discrimination and segregation, and just the inability of individuals who are qualified, let's get that out of the way, individuals who are qualified who happen to be African American, Latino, or women, they were not given the job because they were African American, Latino, or women. And the Philadelphia plan was designed in many ways to provide those individuals with opportunities that they would not have had to try to make up for a lot of the problems and the racism and discrimination that existed in society in decades and years prior.
Okay.
And so, to kind of tie those two things together. And so, Maynard Jackson used affirmative action when he was building the Hartsfield-Jackson, named after him, airport. I think it was just the Hartsfield International Airport when he was mayor. And so he used affirmative action. And really what it meant was that, hey, look, we're going to need contracts. We're going to need contractors to do the work. And so we want to have a certain percentage of those contractors be minority-owned companies. And so, of course, individuals had never done that before. And so he caught a lot of resistance from the business community. But he knew that was something that he needed to do because of the time period. And if you're going to have a city that is, I'm trying to remember if it was majority black then. If it was not majority black, it was close to being majority equally black and white. You should have a certain percentage of those companies being a part of that major undertaking that was going to take place in the 70s and 80s.
And then the kind of follow up on those questions was affirmative action. How do you view it with education?
I think that affirmative action is interesting now. It's definitely needed and necessary because you still have situations where individuals are not allowed to either get admitted because of their race or their gender or their sexual orientation. And so I think you need to have at least, I won't argue for an individual quota or a certain percentage, but I think you need to have some sort of oversight to make sure that if individuals are qualified, then they should be allowed to be admitted or attend, and that their race or their ethnicity or their gender or their sexual orientation should not keep them out.
So my next question is kind of a little long-winded question on my part.
Okay.
So I believe my last semester within education class, a thing about YSU, and I imagine with other education programs throughout the country, do have field work.
Yes.
Where students go out and get experience in the classroom.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not going to name names, I'm not going to name school, but one of the experience I had in one of my recent field works was teachers kind of complaining about the work
Mm-hmm.
and complaining about the system
Mm-hmm.
and kind of almost losing faith in the system.
Mm-hmm.
And one question is, how do you help a teacher that's losing faith?
Mm.
If you want to attack that one.
That's interesting. You know what? I'm gonna be honest with you. And so let me. It won't be a long-winded answer, but it could turn out to be one. But I'll try not to make it that way. When I first started this, being a teacher educator, and you would ask me that question, I would say, you know what? I want to talk to that teacher and ultimately figure out what can the school do, what can the district do to make that experience better for that particular teacher. Where have we gone wrong? If I had that power, if I had that influence, and try to make that situation work for that teacher. Now, 15 years into this thing right here, where I am right now, another 5 years at another institution, I don't know. I would almost argue that, you know what, if you don't want to be here and you don't have faith in the system, then maybe we should, find something else for you to do. I think that because ultimately it's not about the individual teacher, it's really about the young people, the children that they're educating. And so if you can be in that environment and not be in that environment, but let's say 15, 20, 25 hours, and you sense that, imagine what those young people sense. And so, if you're there and you're not enjoying it and you don't feel the same passion that you may have felt earlier, and clearly your young people that you're supposed to be teaching, they sense that, they feel that as well, maybe we need to find something else for that teacher to do. Again, that's where I am right now. That may be harsh for some individuals to hear, but I think that, and I'm not saying necessarily you fire individuals, but you just find something for them to do different if they don't have passion for that particular grade level, subject matter, whatever that is. Again, that kind of feeds into the problem we talked about earlier in terms of a lack of teachers, a lack of a teacher shortage in many ways. But I'm not of the mindset that just having any warm body in the classroom will ultimately, make things better. I think that you need to have effective individuals in the classrooms teaching young people. So that's my answer. I would maybe try to find something else for them that they would have passion to do, rather than trying to, change what we're doing to fit the needs of that particular teacher. Maybe we need to find something else for that teacher to do that would realize some of her strengths or his or her strengths or strengths or passions that they no longer have.
So this is a two-part question.
Okay.
So we know that the pandemic affected education. How would you describe that effect?
I think that the pandemic it shed light on pre-existing issues that were in education. I think one of the major problems that you saw exacerbated was, like I said, the lack of teachers, qualified teachers in classrooms. I think that it was exacerbated so that when we came out of the pandemic, you had a lot of teachers that were just like they were done. Even though they loved the young people, they loved their profession, they loved teaching, but they just said, this going through that experience, they didn't want anything else to do with education. And, what they were asked to do, you can't really blame them. I have no problem with that. But again, I think it kind of shed a light on some existing problems and really show where some of the problems were, and it kind of exacerbated the issues that we had in terms of finding quality teachers for our classrooms, for many of our classrooms.
And I know no one wants to say the next pandemic, but do you think we've learned how to handle education for next pandemic? Interesting.
Let me add something else to the previous question, and I'll answer that one as well. The one thing that we learned, even here in higher ed, is to be nimble in terms of also having the online components to our courses as well as the face-to-face, and I think they also did that in the K through 12 schools as well. The way they had to do it was very rapid and very quick. It wasn't ideal, but it was through that experience that people learned what they could actually do using these interfaces. So using the different models and the different software that you could ultimately teach classes online, virtually. And so coming out of that, we've become a little bit more nimble. And so that's one of the positive things, I would say, that have come out of that.
And then one of the questions you bring up in class is education an equalizer? And would you say it's an equalizer?
You know what, man, I'm gonna be honest with you. At this stage in my career, I would say, no, it's not left to its own devices. I think that it has the potential. It has the potential to ultimately lift individuals up, poor working class individuals into different stratus of life, socioeconomic statuses. But left to its own devices, I think that it can ultimately lead to social reproduction. Basically, that wherever you come in to the institution is where you remain, unless you have schools. You have teachers that come in and ultimately take control of that situation. Unless you have parents that ultimately working with those teachers, make that system do what it can ultimately do, which is lift everyone up and become the great equalizer. But just to say, okay, I'm going to send you here and we'll see you out in 12 years and you'll be ready to go on to college or university, that could happen. But unless you're actively engaged and involved and you have teachers on the other side that are pushing and having high expectations of those students, It may happen, but it may not happen. Nothing can happen on its own. It really needs to be a lot of work involved on both sides in order for that to happen, in order for it to be the great equalizer that Horseman designed it to be.
So I think we're going to start wrapping up the interview, and I have
Okay.
a couple questions.
Okay.
What's your what would your closing statement be first about education?
I think education has the potential to be, well, let's say it this way. Let me start over. I think that parents and families are the first educators. And, you know, as schools and as teachers, we have to pick up on how best we can educate all students. That in many ways, and I think that's the key to ultimately helping students to realize their fullest potential. You know, not to look at parents and families as adversaries, but look at them as individuals that can help us to better educate the students that are in our classrooms. To build a partnership with those families and with those parents to ultimately educate those students to the best of their ability.
And then the next statement, or in a broad statement, what would you say for a teacher wanting or still undecided?
I'd say that, you know, this is an excellent field to be in, and the teaching profession is one of the most profound professions since forever, as long as we can remember. Of course, as an organized profession, we're talking the 1800s, but people have been teaching and educating since there have been people. And I think that to be a part of that, to ultimately be a part of a young person realizing something or learning something for the first time, that light going off in their head, the light in their eyes, based on the book that we're reading, is a profound thing. And who wouldn't want to be a part of that? You know that if you're a part of that child's life and you're able to allow that to happen, you'll never be forgotten. You will live on in the memory, in the life of that young person, because they will always remember that you were the person that ultimately allowed that light to go off in their minds, that light to go off in their eyes. And for me, you know, there's no greater feeling in the world. You know, you can't put a price on that in many ways, to be a part of the awakening of a young person, wherever that thing is or whatever we're doing, because they will always, you know, think back to you and the impact that you had on their lives in many ways. And who doesn't want that?
And then, do you have any final statement that you would like to share with
I
viewers?
mean, man, I think I've pretty much said it all. I just think that, again, this is a wonderful profession. I'm glad that I'm a part of it. And, you know, I enjoy my opportunity to come to work and work with students like you, as well as other faculty members who truly care about uplifting and improving the lives of young people.
Okay, and I think we're going to wrap it up there. Hopefully the viewer learned enough. Hopefully they learned a lot.
So. Yes, sir. Hope so.
And thank you for being the first guest.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. This is excellent. Yeah, I like this, man. It's cool.
And
Okay, so hopefully you enjoyed that podcast. If you did, don't be afraid to support the channel, subscribe, leave a like, comment. If you want to suggest other people, if you know someone that you want to see interviewed, I'll love to talk to them. All you have to do is let me know in the comment section, and then we'll work something out from there. If you want to stay in touch with me and what's going on, you want to know what I'm going to stream next, what am I going to review next, what am I going to write next, follow me on Twitter. If you want to know what I'm reading, follow me on Goodreads. And if you want to check out my novel, Black Monday, which is available on Amazon. If you like zombies, you like survival, check it out. But I will hopefully talk to you guys Wednesday, possible review. If not, we'll do what we did Friday, and that was the language learning stream. And I will talk to you then. Stay safe. Don't let things bother you too much, mentally, physically. Learn something. Pick up a book. At the time of this video, I am reading Buffalo Soldiers by Hunden Hargrove. Pretty interesting book. Let me know what you're reading in the comment section. I'll talk to you then anyway. I'll talk to you there. Bye-bye.